So I think that's going to shape the view. I think, first of all, because it's a forgotten place, that's going to necessitate that pastor, that planter, that person to view themselves first and foremost as a missionary, and not just simply a pastor, a planter. Because it's a forgotten place, obviously what that means is it's been overlooked with gospel work for a long time. And despite what people would say, if there is not a healthy church in a place, it doesn't matter how well that place does. It's not healthy. So gentrification can fix a lot of problems. It can eradicate the face of poverty, but gentrification doesn't eradicate impoverished hearts. And so people who are moving into these types of communities and types of these neighborhoods must kind of move in with this mindset of I'm here to make, I'm here with great gospel intentionality, sent on mission. So in other words, a lot of times, most places that people move, we move to places because that place offers us benefit. Missionaries move to benefit the place. And so that's the first thing to come to mind, that just reorients, how you live, where you live, your relationship with your neighbors, your relationship with your community, the barbershop, the servers at the neighborhood diner, just everything is an opportunity for mission as a missionary. The second thing that I would think of is just a commitment to long-term ministry, because nothing grows fast in forgotten places. Everything takes longer and it's slower and it's harder. I think often of years ago I had a buddy who bought a lemon tree at like Walmart or somewhere like that, and he brought it home, and it was like this big, and he had a little container, and he nourished that and water. He put a ton of hours into this stupid lemon tree, and I remember a year later asking him, like, man, what was the harvest? Like, what was the fruit? And he was like, I got 3 lemons from my tree this year. And I was like, that's ridiculous. He had hundreds of hours and care, and he was measuring the soil, like just, all kinds of stuff, treating it almost like a newborn baby, for three lemons. So most ministers, most planters, pastors are overlooking neighborhoods like this because nobody wants to live their life being faithful to only get to the end of their days with three lemons. And but what we know, and just as you even think about like the mission movements and modern mission, like as we study missions, is that it's in these places where we walk in a faithful obedience in a long direction, that the Lord over time produces a great harvest from our faithfulness, and you can trace that throughout just missiological studies. And so just to answer that, I'm thinking primarily like it's a missionary mindset. So if you're considering coming, you're coming as a missionary. That's what we try to equip and train all the members of our church. You're missionaries here. But then secondly, a commitment to long-term being here, slow fruit, but faithful ministry.
Awesome. That's so great. Guess I don't get my gardening tips from you if I'm trying to grow things. Okay, got it. Thanks, man. This is to you, Dexley, this question. What steps must pastors, planters, and churches take to discover the heartbeat of their neighborhoods?
Yeah, I think this begins before doing any work in the community, in your heart. You need to have a heart that's desiring to discover. I didn't think I'd be the person who would always, after having a baby, use their baby in illustrations, but it's kind of hard not to. And so when Malachi is really interested in something, his eyes light up. They get really big. And when he's not interested, he looks the other way, right? And I think we need to come into our communities with those big eyes, with a genuine interest to discover the heartbeat of these people. And so I would encourage you, these are not places where we're getting projects done, but we're looking to impact lives with the gospel. And so you need to go in with a genuine desire, a genuine interest in the Imago Dei people living in that community. And if you don't have that, and you're there for the eagerness, the excitement of starting something new, I'd encourage you to stop, pray, and reconsider that. So I think you need to do that work before actually trying to answer this question. It has to begin in your heart. Do I actually care? Do I have an interest in the people in this neighborhood, in this community? I think once you get past that, I think then beginning to think about getting connected into the existing systems of where you are. And so I'll use our neighborhood as an example. And so we're trying to do this a few different ways. Right adjacent to our church, we have a Montessori school. And so me and Sabrina, who heads that school, have met several times over the last couple of months. We've just talked and learned each other's history, the history of that school, our church, and we've begun just to think and talk about what it would look like for us to work together. Another way we've looked to do this is by getting connected to our local elementary school. It's got several hundred students, and so at this point, monthly, we get to participate in some of the events that occur there. Last month, we got to pack T-shirts for teachers and students. They have a new school uniform, and so we got to do that with some of the staff there to serve the teachers. We've been there for career days. I've gotten to go there. My background is engineering, so I got to talk to several classrooms of third graders and just share with them some of my own life. And so I think part of this is getting connected to the local entities around the area. I think another way is, learning the history of this community. One example of this is we have a community center in our neighborhood that was shut down during COVID. And as you talk to the people in that neighborhood, this was a real centering place where the old, the young, and everything in between gathered. Basketball, chess, lunches, everyone gathered here. And so there was a community mourning about the fact that this building, this place, which was more than a building, was a home, has been shut down. And so that's one of the things we've been as a church praying about, and me personally, how do we help facilitate a space like that to get the community coming together? And in light of that, one of the things I would encourage you to do as you figure out the heartbeat of a neighborhood is just to walk your neighborhood. I used to do this with our previous pastor, and I do this as well. Just walk and pray. And what you'll find is that God will put people in your path. You'll get into conversations you didn't think you were going to. You'll get to know people you would have never known if you had just made church a Sunday morning thing. And that's about it. Walk that neighborhood. Pray as you walk. Ask God to divinely appoint people in your path, and you'll discover some of what is ticking in that community.
Thank you so much. That's really great. That's really helpful. Thabiti, this is to you. As pastors, planners, and churches, serving in forgotten and gospel-parched communities will often feel isolated and alone at times. Bereft of spiritual fruit, what must they do to endure for the spiritual decades of ministry and being faithful to those ministries?
So I'm trying to endure. I don't have sort of answers to that. I think I give some thoughts. One is related to what Morgan said earlier. I do think you have to sort of revisit your calling to that neighborhood and that ministry as a kind of touchstone. And you got to remind yourself that you were sent there by a sovereign God to do that work. The second thing I think we have to do is we have to sort of divorce or separate the notion, rethink the notion that how well the community is doing is a report card on our ministry. I think it's easy for us to sort of slide into thinking that the measure of our ministry is some kind of impact that we have on our neighborhood. We of course want to see impact, we want to see that kind of fruit, but 1 Corinthians 4, 1 and 2 make it pretty clear that it's required of stewards that they be found faithful. And so to sort of pull back from looking at those external measures to sort of having conversations with others about, are we being faithful here? Are we faithful to preach the gospel? Are we faithful to love people? Are we faithful to do the good works that the Lord has prepared for us to walk in? And to sort of find a contentedness in that faithfulness. That's what gets the well done, a good faithful servant. I think the other thing that's necessary to endurance is community, right? So we're not Lone Ranger Christians. We're not Lone Ranger pastors and leaders, or at least we shouldn't be. And so I think we have to relinquish our passive approach to friendship, and we have to actively cultivate it. Meaningful, deep, hopefully lasting friendships, I think, is essential to enduring. And the last thing I would say is, it seems to me that endurance is the echo of hope, and hope is a discipline, right? We have to practice hope. Psalm 42, 43, we sang earlier, we got to grab ourselves by the spiritual collar and say, why are you downcast, O my soul? Hope in God. Now that we're helped in that when we have community, but it seems to me that among all the other spiritual disciplines that we should practice and press into, pressing into hope is really important. Hope, joy, those things are kind of construals about the future, right? They're sort of prophecies that we're making about the future. That we are rooting our hope, we're rooting in our joy, we're placing it beyond the reach of our enemies, in the lap of a glorious God who has made us certain promises, right, which are unshakable. And so hope and joy and so many other Christian virtues are laying hold to those promises, kept for us by the power of God, shielded by faith, beyond the reach of our enemies. And so those would be some things, I think, to do.
It's really rich. Thank you. Thank you for your thoughts. Appreciate that. Luke, to wrap us out here, what should those who are called to gospel ministry think about as they consider ministry in the forgotten places?
I think because of the nature of the church where we are, it's common. I'm kind of imagining a brother receiving a call to pastoral ministry. I'm imagining myself partly here. They begin to see that possible future and that future scenario. They kind of arrive at by asking a question like, where can I go so that in the next 3 to 5 years I can be preaching to or ministering to the greatest number of souls on a Sunday morning? And maybe they're imagining an already established church. Maybe they're imagining, if not that, a place where that could be established in that kind of same time frame. Now, that's not meant to set that guy up as a bad guy. That train of thought is probably reasonable because the idea is constructed based on the pictures that he's seen, and what he's experienced. It's mostly unconscious, right? And so his mind just kind of takes the data that he's received and goes, okay, that's good. I'm burdened to preach. I'm burdened to minister. Here's a reasonable time frame. So he's not wicked. It's just the thing. That's just the picture that comes up in his mind, right? The danger, though, at its very worst, is that can become a question of platform, a question of where will my gift be best displayed. And maybe that's a question some of us are still wrestling with. And I would want to commend to that brother and perhaps to myself a few years ago that maybe not a question of platform, but a question of potential. I don't love that word, but I think it encapsulates kind of what I'm getting at. I mean that in terms of fields ripe for the harvest, but short of laborers. So these considerations aren't merely for those called to pastoral ministry. These are kind of any type of ministry worker, missionary type positions. So what I would commend then, instead of thinking of already established platforms where your gifts might be best displayed or quickly employed, I would want to commend that brother or sister to shift their focus to established neighborhoods full of potential, neighborhoods where there currently is no Christ-exalting, gospel-heralding grieving together, experiencing joy together, body of saints. So I'd be asking them then to consider, what might it mean for you to take up residence in a new place, in a new neighborhood, take spiritual ownership for that place, becoming an ambassador to that place, pleading with your neighbors for their own reconciliation with Christ, and then laboring steadfastly for the long haul, for a long time, to see the sheep of God's flock rescued and united with Christ. Now that's a really different kind of picture, only insofar as the parameters are different. The calling is the same. It's the exact same calling, but the numbers are shifted. The fruit being reaped in your own vision is shifted, right? So that type of neighborhood ministry very much is frontier ministry. It's almost like, there's nothing there. So you're not going into an established platform. You're going into an old neighborhood, but where there's nothing. And so that then would prompt future questions, other questions, questions on the cost of following Jesus. For many, that means going to a place where life is very much unlike what they've known. The way they engage with the city, the way they engage with neighbors, it's just different. It's not better, it's not necessarily worse, although there may be things that are harder. It's just new. And that's going to mean leaving home, and not just for a little bit. This is shifting from the idea of establishment within 3 to 5 years and hoping for 3 to 5 decades of faithful, laboring, tilling hard soil. And like I briefly mentioned this morning, it's because it's a psalm I read this morning, that those who sow weeping will reap and come in with shouts of joy. It's not a 3 to 5 year endeavor, friends, in the forgotten neighborhoods of particularly the areas that we're thinking of here in New England. So it is the same calling to make disciples, and yet the parameters, I think, are shifted some. So I would ask and commend that dear brother or sister to consider the glorious calling, the wonderful privilege of being called into a neighborhood to give their life, laboring for those neighbors, that they might hear the gospel, respond to the gospel, submit to the Lord Jesus Christ and be united with him, and that they might see in that very neighborhood a body of Christ birthed that then endures for decades into the future.
Yeah. Thank you, Luke. That was really wise, brother. Can you thank these participants?